What's up, dudes and dudes to the internet? My name's Scythe, and today we are going to be talking about the new Shadow Tower Hydra boss. Oh man, this boss is actually kind of was in development a couple years back. I guess it wasn't actually in development, but a couple years ago, the devs ended up actually having a forum post where the community ended up voting on what the next Shadow Tower boss was going to be. And everybody ended up voting on this big Hydra boss concept, right? Hydra's a snake with many heads, or a snake-like creature. As you end up cutting off one head, it's supposed to end up regrowing some others, which the boss itself doesn't actually end up doing that. But the recent dev stream ended up talking a lot about, giving a lot of info about subclasses, which we'll talk about that in another video, but most of all, they actually showed off the Hydra boss, which is pretty crazy to think that this boss was talked about such a long time ago, and now actually seems like it's finally going to get into the game. So without further ado, folks, let's get the footage in here. So the devs ended up warping themselves to the Shadow Tower, and then they ended up using a command to warp to the final phase, meaning that the Hydra boss is going to be the same as any other Shadow Tower, where you're going to end up having to progress through all of the levels to actually getting to the boss. I mean, we didn't really expect anything different, right? But as we get into the Shadow Tower arena for the new Titan boss, you can see it's a very unique place, very beautiful. They've actually got the spawning skulls is actually on the edge of the wall, kind of implying that the creature is kind of coming out of a cave or a dark portal. They kind of procrastinated a little bit, and we're trying to drag it out and get the hype train going by showing off the room and stuff like that. And it's pretty cool because the ceiling, as far as I know, that's actually supposed to be like kind of like a picture of the Hydra, unless it's supposed to be something about like a dark portal coming out. But oh man, this boss is beautiful. It's not gonna actually be a boss that roams around or anything like that, as you'll see when they activate it in 2 seconds here. It's actually gonna be a boss that is literally coming out of the wall and only has his front half. So here he is, the Hydra boss after all this time. He looks beautiful with his animation. Each of the heads is going to end up shooting acid out of them, and then every now and then he's gonna have a special attack where all of the heads are going to end up shooting acid, and then he also has these little snake minions that are gonna show up. And this guy actually is going to be very unique from the other bosses in that he's going to have different phases, very similar to Daughter of the Moon, where some of his attacks are going to end up changing as he ends up getting less and less health. So at 50% health, 40% health, 30% health, and 20% health, I think at 50% is when his first head ends up getting knocked off, and they actually had a very nice scenic shot of the boss right there. The acid that's actually being thrown on the ground too. Fun fact, a long time ago, the devs actually talked about how they were going to be adding a new liquid substance to Trove. And, you know, we kind of guessed it right then and there that it was going to be acid for the Hydra. And they actually have, like, for console players, you don't actually have the dragon bosses yet, but they're going to be showing up sometime soon. There's actually the underwater dragon boss who shoots acid. And, yeah, it's going to be the exact same acid that the Hydra boss is going to end up using himself. So, as you end up kind of knocking off his head and stuff like that, he pretty much is just going to end up changing his strategy by summoning more minions. That pretty much just seemed to be what it was, and maybe his attacks become a little bit more frequent. If you end up getting too close to him, the heads will bite you and do a unique biting animation for that. I don't know whether or not they're going to actually track the player, which would be really cool to see. But then in the final phase, he's actually going to have a stomp ability, which they'll show that off in a little bit here. But for the most part, it's you know, they don't really show the best example of it, but it just kind of does a stomp attack. I don't know whether or not it's something that you actually have to jump off of the ground to avoid, or if it's just a new melee type of attack, because generally the boss can't move, so you can stay and keep your distance, and most of all, what you're gonna actually be dealing with is the minions. And the devs even jokingly said, like, you know, if you think Ultra Pinata has too many ads, well, get ready for the Hydra, which, you know, kind of has me a little bit worried, because it seems like the boss's strategy is actually going to be reliant more on the minions themselves rather than the boss itself actually being something complex to fight. And as you can see in the footage as well, The dev actually keeps trying to attack his head and do kind of cool stuff like that, but rest assured this is still Trove, so it seems like the main body section is going to be the actual weak point of the boss. That's going to be the only area where you can actually end up damaging it. The crystal on its neck is nothing fancy, that's just there for looks, it doesn't actually do anything, but very, very cool boss to say the least that they actually ended up adding it. We'll see what ends up happening, you know, just because of the amount of minions and stuff like that. That's definitely going to make it very, very difficult. Like you can see right here, completely swamped. Now the character that they were using was only like 3k PR, and I think this is normal Hydra boss, but honestly, I'm not exactly sure. The fact is, though, that acid, I'm assuming, is going to be just as deadly as the deep ocean dragon, which means that if you're in U9 and you get hit by that acid, it pretty much takes a pop. Like, you're going to end up taking full damage and you're going to die instantly. So that's where Death Defying becomes, you know, a very essential flash to end up using. So we'll see what ends up happening with the Hydra boss. But the fact that it's reliant on minions, again, has me a little bit worried. And as far as the phases are concerned, it's not anything fancy like Daughter of the Moon, where she ends up getting different abilities and different moves periodically. There was the stomp attack right there, by the way. But it's going to mostly be about the minions, summoning more and more minions, which is just going to make things a lot more difficult. And I really like how the boss actually has like different heads coming off and is actually coded like that, which means that while, you know, the minions are going to compensate for the fact that there's going to be less heads spitting as much acid, right? But for the most part, it seems like it still kind of stays at the same difficulty and gets harder and harder the further you end up getting through it. So one thing, again, that I'm a little bit worried about here is the fact that because of the fact that the boss is just getting harder and harder as you progress, it could potentially end up being one of those ones where, you know, you might be doing really, really good, and then at the end you just get swarmed with the enemies, and then rip, that's it, you're just absolutely dead. So there was a couple other very important notes that they did end up saying as far as the Shadow Towers are concerned. One thing I do want to say, which I do find a little bit disappointing, I hope that they elaborate on that a little bit in the future, but it seemed like they were actually very unsure that whether or not this Shadow Tower update, which is supposed to be coming with subclasses, gem re-rolling, and a whole bunch of other great stuff, but they were very unsure whether or not this update was going to hit consoles the same time as it hit PC, which has me really worried that either they're going to use the PC community as kind of a beta tester and bug tester for these new features and then add it to the console, which is fine, but then it makes me worry and wonder how long is it going to actually take for the update to end up hitting console players after it's come out on the PC, because the whole thing that's supposed to be going on right now before the Shadow Tower update is we're supposed to be getting the Megalithic update on consoles, which is supposed to be bringing the current version on the console up to the current version that the PC is running, and then it's supposed to be in sync with their updates from the future on, right? Another thing too that they did talk about is they're going to be doing a little bit of an overhaul as far as Shadow Towers are concerned in general. They're going to have Ultra Towers become a lot stronger. Normal and Hard Towers, they said, are roughly going to end up staying at the same level of difficulty, so early on players don't need to worry about that. Kind of has me worried again because of the fact that there are definitely lots of people that can get through Ultra Tower and get like the top 100 for speed running and stuff like that. And you know, you don't really have that much trouble going through Ultra Tower if you've played this game for a very long time, because the majority of people still have a very hard time with Ultra Towers. So hopefully when the gem re-rolling comes out with his Shadow Tower update, it's going to make that a little bit easier for most players to end up getting some ideal stats for actually getting into the Shadow Towers, because otherwise, if they're going to be buffing it, I mean, that's kind of going to suck, right? But the subclass abilities as well is going to end up being a very big change. So another thing that they did mention with that, and with upping the difficulty and making the enemies stronger, is they potentially are going to be adding new abilities to certain enemies. The example that they ended up using was they were saying that the normal little crawling spider enemies in Shadow Towers, this is just normal Shadow Tower waves, not like the bosses or anything like that, but they were saying that they might have like a new ability that they would only end up using while in Ultra Shadow Tower, right? So it has me really interested to see, is it Oh, water went down the wrong tube. Sorry about that. Is it going to end up being like an actual full-on new attack for the enemy that's going to make it more difficult, or is it just going to be some type of an ability that the creature is just going to end up spamming? I don't know. We'll see what happens. The other thing, too, that I wonder is whether or not they're going to kind of make a difference between Ultra Shadow Tower Titan bosses actually having new attacks as well, but most likely not. I'm expecting that they're going to end up being roughly the exact same, if not just having like more damage to them in total. So that pretty much ends up covering it, everybody. Hopefully you found this video, you know, to your liking and thought that this was as cool as I do. You know, the fact that the Hydra is finally going to be added to the game sometime soon. Generally what we've kind of suspected and what they estimated that the devs ended up giving was that the megalithic update, which is actually supposed to be scheduled for this month, June, roughly the Shadow Tower update is going to end up coming out 2 to 3 months after that, so maybe 2 to 3 months onward from this month. But again, we'll see what ends up happening. You know, they ended up showing off a whole bunch of other stuff in the stream that I'll of course end up showing off in another video very, very soon. But the Hydra definitely was the highlight and has me very, very excited to see what ends up happening with this guy. They did talk about how the Dreadnought, which is going to be the other Shadow Tower boss, they are going to be talking about that and showing it sometime soon, but it's not really at a point where they're happy enough with it to actually show off like what it is going to end up being, right? So in any case, thank you so much for watching, everybody. I would very much appreciate if you would like, share, favorite, and subscribe for more daily content. Sign away and stay epic, everybody.